porch lantern had been burning since dusk, its yellow light trembling over the snow like a small candle cupped against the mountain wind. Clara Whitcomb had told herself she lit it for the neighbors, for any late truck easing along Hollow Ridge Road, for the delivery man who sometimes forgot which houses sat behind which firs. But on Christmas Eve, everyone in the valley knew the truth without needing to say it. She lit it for the bobcat. Snow had fallen softly all afternoon, gathering on the railings, smoothing old boot prints beside the woodpile, turning the yard into something hushed and waiting. Inside the house, cider breathed cinnamon into the kitchen. The radio played an old carol so quietly that the words seemed to come from another room. Clara stood by the window with one hand around her chipped green mug and the other on the sill where paint had worn away beneath her thumb. At 62, she had learned not to expect wild things to stay. Still, and every Christmas Eve, she found herself listening for the same sound. Not a meow, not a cry, not anything tame enough to belong near a porch, but the soft compression of snow under careful paws. For years, the bobcat had come back only on this night, as if the forest itself had remembered the date. She would appear beyond the spruce shadows with a pale muzzle, tufted ears, and a crescent notch missing from the left one. She would stop beneath the lantern and look at the house with gold-green eyes that had once been too tired to stay open. Clara had never known whether Miracle understood Christmas Eve. She knew only that the bobcat returned. If this quiet story touched anyone listening far away, a gentle like or subscription would have helped keep such memories alive. Clara would have loved hearing where they were watching from, and the name of an animal that had left a mark on their heart. Outside, the wind scraped loose snow from the roof and brushed it down in a silver veil. The house had been quiet for so many winters that Clara Canueve kept every creak, the pantry pipe, the back stairs, the radiator clink. This was not one of those sounds. She lowered the mug. Beyond the window, near the crooked lilac bush, a shadow separated itself from the trees. Clara did not move. She had learned that hope could be noisy if handled carelessly. Her breath clouded the glass. The shape paused where the yard sloped toward Miracle Brook, half hidden by blowing flakes. Then it stepped forward, one paw placed so neatly before the other that each track looked written rather than made. The bobcat came into the porch light. She was larger than Clara remembered, broad through the shoulders now, with a winter coat thick enough to make her seem carved from frost. The old notch in her left ear showed dark against the snow. One whisker on the right side still bent strangely outward. She held her tail low, the black tip twitching once, twice, with the attention of a creature measuring every smell and memory. Clara's fingers tightened around the mug until the warmth stung her knuckles. "Hello, little Miracle," she whispered, though the window held the words inside. The bobcat's ears angled forward. She looked at Moaf the porch step, the one with the split down the center that Clara had meant to repair for 7 summers. She sniffed the air. Then, with the faintest huff, she turned her cheek against the bottom rail and rubbed once, slow and deliberate, leaving her scent where the old wood had weathered silver. That was how she had always chosen to say enough. Not hello. Not thank you. Not love. In any human shape. Just cheek to wood. Whiskers brushing frost. Wild body marking the edge of a place she had never fully entered and never fully forgotten. Clara felt the ache rise behind her eyes, familiar as the winter draft beneath the door. Christmas Eves had held too much space since David S. Boots disappeared from the mat, and Matthew S. calls from Burlington came between hospital shifts. At the elementary library, children still checked out books beneath paper stars. but home remained quieter than she admitted. But this visitor made time fold back on itself. On the counter, Clara had left a plain biscuit for herself and a bowl for the neighbor's barn cat, who had visited earlier and complained at the wrong door. She almost smiled. Mr. Pickwick believed every wild creature in Vermont was a personal insult. Miracle ignored the kitchen smells. She did not beg. She did not paw at the door. Her nose lifted toward the eaves where last summer's swallows had tucked their mud nests. A flake landed on her muzzle, and she shook her head with a small, irritated snap that made Clara's mouth soften. Even now, after all these years, she disliked snow on her nose. The lantern flickered. Clara reached slowly for the switch beside the window and turned off the kitchen light, leaving the room dim except for the stove clock and the amber porch glow. It was an old habit between them. Darkness inside, light outside. Space enough for a wild animal to choose. In the softer dark, Clara saw her reflection fade and Miracle's shape sharpen beyond it. The bobcat sat on the snow-covered step, front paws close together, body still as a carved church mouse. She looked smaller that way, almost like the half-frozen kit Clara had once found beside Miracle Brook, except nothing about her was helpless now. She had the forest in her spine. She had distance in her eyes. And yet she had come back. The house seemed to listen with Clara. The cedar wreath shifted against its red ribbon. The blue blanket over the rocking chair held the faint smell of wool and wood smoke. Somewhere in the wall, a mouse made a nervous whisper and went quiet. Clara let out a tiny breath that was almost a laugh. Miracle's head turned toward the sound. For a long moment, woman and bobcat held still on either side of the glass, divided by shelter, joined by memory. Clara did not open the door. She did not reach for a camera. She did not call anyone. There were things too fragile to share while they were still happening. She stood there, silver hair pinned badly and one slipper sliding off her heel, watching a wild creature sit beneath her Christmas lantern, as if the night had delivered back a prayer she had never dared speak aloud. Before Miracle ever stepped under Clara's porch lantern, Hollow Ridge had already taught her how loud a quiet house could be. The house sat halfway up a narrow Vermont road, where the mailboxes leaned together against the wind and the pines pressed close enough to come snow from the roof. It had belonged to Clara and David for 31 years, though after he was gone, it seemed to belong more to weather than to people. In January, the windows wore frost along the edges. In April, mud sucked at the truck tires. By November, the wood stove became the only heartbeat that kept the kitchen company after dark. Clara worked at the elementary school library in Alder Creek, where the flagpole clicked in the wind and mittens were lost with great seriousness. She shelved picture books, taped torn pages, and kept a jar of sharpened pencils for children who arrived empty-handed. Every morning, she drove down the ridge before sunrise with coffee in her chipped green mug. Every evening, she returned with a canvas bag full of books no one had asked her to bring home. She still set 2 plates on the table sometimes. Not often. Just on long days when the light faded early and habit moved quicker than memory, she would take 1 plate back to the cabinet, touch the rim with her thumb, and stand for a moment listening to the refrigerator hum. David had been a careful man with kind hands, the sort who fixed hinges before they squeaked and whistled only when he thought no one was listening. The broken porch step had been on his list this summer, before the illness made lists useless. Their son, Matthew, called when he could. He was 34, living in Burlington, working long hours as a nurse. He loved his mother. Clara never doubted it. But love over a phone line did not fill a chair at supper, and it did not answer back when the old pipes knocked at midnight. So she kept small routines as if they were kindling. On Mondays, she baked molasses bread and gave half to Nora Bell, the neighbor whose mailbox wore a knitted red hat every December. On Wednesdays, she mended the schoolless puppets, though one fox puppet had such a crooked smile that even the kindergartners looked concerned. On Fridays, she swept the porch and scolded the wind for bringing back the same pine needles she had just removed. Mr. Pickwick, Nora's orange barn cat, often supervised from the woodpile with the grave expression of a retired judge. The ridge had its own shy life beyond those routines. Deer moved like brown smoke at dawn. Crows bounced on the frozen road and complained about everything. Once, near the culvert by Miracle Brook, Clara saw the round print of a bobcat pressed into mud, no claw marks showing, the heel pad shaped like a secret. Ranger Eli Marsh told her later that bobcats often walked as if saving sound for emergencies. They kept to edges, he said. Stone walls, creek beds, spruce shadows. They could be close without belonging to anyone seeing. Clara thought about that more than she expected. She understood edges. In the first winter after David's passing, the valley tried to be kind. Nora brought chicken soup in jars. Pastor Mel left a wreath on the porch. The school children made cards with crooked stars and snowmen that looked as if they had survived strong opinions. Clara thanked everyone. She smiled. She made tea. Then, when the visitors left and the house settled again, she stood beside the sink and felt the quiet return to its full size. Christmas was hardest, 'cause David had loved it, without making any noise about loving it. He had cut cedar boughs for the mantel. He had hung the porch lantern a little straighter each year and pretended not to care when Clara rearranged the ornaments after him. He had always saved one peppermint stick in his shirt pocket for Matthew, even after Matthew had grown too tall and serious for such things. After he was gone, Clara kept the lantern burning through December, not because she felt festive, but because darkness arrived too early on Hollow Ridge, and she could not bear to let the porch look abandoned. At home, she spoke mostly to objects. She thanked the kettle. She apologized to the rocking chair when she bumped it. She told the stubborn gate latch that it had David's personality and no right to be proud of it. Sometimes she laughed after saying such things, surprising herself with the sound. Still, she was lonelier than she admitted. The kind of loneliness Clara carried did not look like despair. It looked like extra soup stored in the freezer. It looked like waiting one more minute before turning off the porch light, though there was no car coming up the road. That December had been colder than most. Miracle Brook froze early along the edges, its dark middle still whispering under shelves of ice. The fir trees bowed under snow, and at night the moon made the yard bright enough to read by. Clara began noticing little signs near the creek, a scatter of feathers without violence in it, a rabbit trail that stopped at a stone wall, a narrow place beneath the brush where some careful body had passed again and again. She told herself not to imagine stories. Wild animals had their own troubles. They did not arrive to fix human hearts. They hunted, hid, endured storms, raised young when they could, and disappeared when the world asked too much. Clara respected that. But on the morning before Christmas Eve, as she stood outside, shaking crumbs from a blue dish towel, she heard a thin rustle from the spruce line. Mr. Pickwick heard it too. The orange cat had been sitting by the woodpile, round as a loaf, pretending not to hope for breakfast. At the sound, he rose, puffed himself into offended grandeur, and retreated behind the stacked maple logs with only his tail showing. Clara looked toward the trees. Nothing moved. only snow sifted from a branch, soft as flour falling through fingers. Yet the air felt altered, as if some unseen life had paused nearby and held its breath with hers. Clara stayed on the porch until her hands grew cold around the towel. Then she went inside, set the kettle on, and left the lantern burning long after morning had fully arrived. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the sky had lowered until the whole ridge seemed tucked beneath one gray wool blanket. Clara came home early from the school library because the roads had begun to shine. She parked beside the shed and listened before going inside. The world had that deep winter silence that arrived only when snow softened every edge. Just flakes ticking against her coat sleeves and the gate latch moving in the wind. Then she heard it. A sound came from beyond the woodpile, down where Miracle Brook curved behind the spruce trees. It was barely more than a ragged rasp, swallowed by the weather. Clara might have mistaken it for a branch scraping ice, except it came again, thinner this time, carrying the loneliness of something alive trying not to be found. She set her canvas bag on the porch. Mr. Pickwick, waiting near the back step with snow stippling his orange head, turned toward the creek, flattened his ears, and made a sound that suggested he had remembered an appointment elsewhere. He trotted to Nora Bell's stone wall and looked back once, offended that Clara had not followed his example. Then the rasp came again. She went inside only long enough to pull on David's old wool coat, take a flashlight, leather gloves, and the blue blanket from the rocking chair. At the door, she paused, hearing David's voice in memory, telling her not to wander alone in bad weather. "Motkano ovekep," she whispered to the empty kitchen. Then she stepped into the snow. The path to the brook was hidden beneath drifts that reached the tops of her boots. Fir branches brushed her shoulders and dropped cold powder down her neck. The air smelled of iron, pine, and coming night. When she clicked on the flashlight, its beam caught flakes so thickly that it looked as if she were walking through a jar of shaken stars. Near the creek bank, she found the first sign. Tiny tracks crossed the snow in a broken line, too round for a fox, too neat for a house cat. They wandered, stopped, doubled back, then dragged slightly near an exposed root. Clara crouched with one gloved hand braced on her knee. Her heart began to beat in a careful, frightened way. Another rasp came from beneath a fallen spruce. Clara turned the light slowly. Two eyes reflected from a hollow between roots, dull gold and furious. For a moment she saw only the eyes. Then the shape around them emerged, a bobcat kitten, small enough to fit under an upturned crate, hunched in snow and dead needles. Her coat was mottled brown and gray, dusted white along the spine. One ear had a fresh crescent nick near the tip. The whiskers on her right side bent oddly forward, crusted with frost. She held one front paw tucked close and trembled so hard that the dry fern stems above her shivered. Clara stopped breathing. The kitten opened her mouth and hissed. It should have been frightening. It was meant to be. The sound was all warning, all wild pride. A fierce little blade drawn from a body nearly spent. But it came out weak and airy, and that made Clara's chest hurt more than any cry could have. "Oh, you poor little spark," she murmured. The bobcat flattened deeper into the hollow, ears low, pupils wide. She did not understand pity. She understood size, smell, motion, and the danger of being cornered. When Clara shifted 1 inch closer, the kitten struck the snow with her tucked paw, missed everything, and nearly tipped sideways from the effort. Clara moved back at once. "All right," she said softly. "You win." The smallest warmth of the moment came from that absurd truth. The creature could barely sit upright, yet Clara obeyed her as if she were a queen defending a castle. A clump of snow slid from Clara's hat onto her nose, and she wiped it away with a sleeve. Behind her, Mr. Pickwick had reappeared at a safe distance on a stump, sitting with his back turned in theatrical disapproval. Clara knew enough not to scoop a wild animal into her arms. She had shelved too many children's books, where kindness meant hugging everything with fur, and real life had taught her better. Kindness sometimes meant not touching. Kindness sometimes meant backing away while every frightened part of the heart wanted to rush in. She lowered the blue blanket onto the snow, several feet from the hollow, making a loose windbreak against the root. The kitten watched every movement. Her nose twitched, catching wool, smoke, human worry. When Clara withdrew her hand, the bobcat leaned forward a fraction, then froze again as if embarrassed by her own need. Clara's knees ached in the cold. She wished David were there to make the phone call, to stand between her and the feeling that one more fragile life had been placed in her path without instructions. But David was gone, and the kitten was still breathing. Clara backed up until she reached the stone beside the creek. There, with shaking fingers, she called Ranger Eli Marsh. Her phone signal flickered between one bar and none, so she lifted it toward the trees like a woman, offering a prayer to a very practical God. Eli answered on the fourth ring. "Clara, you all right?" "There's a bobcat kit by Miracle Brook," she said. "Small. Cold. Moot thinks she's hurt, but she's got plenty of opinion left. Don't touch her. Keep your distance." Mort met coming with a crate and the rehab carrier. Mort put a blanket near her. "That's fine. Stay where she can see you, but don't crowd her." So Clara stayed. The snow thickened. The brook whispered beneath its ice, as if telling old winter stories to itself. The kitten's eyes remained fixed on Clara, unblinking and distrustful. Once, she stretched her neck toward the blanket and sniffed it. Once, she gave the smallest sneeze, then looked offended by the betrayal of her own nose. Clara laughed under her breath. It surprised her, that tiny laugh beside the frozen creek. It had been so long since worry and tenderness had arrived together that she had almost forgotten they could share the same breath. By the time Eli's truck lights glowed through the trees, Clara's feet had gone numb. Her gloves were rimmed with ice, and the bobcat kitten had shifted for one corner of the blue blanket to touch her shoulder. She was not saved yet, but she was no longer unseen. Ranger Eli Marsh arrived with snow caught in his eyebrows and a green wildlife crate tucked under one arm like a strange, important gift. His truck lights glowed through the spruce trunks, turning the falling flakes bright for a moment before the dark took them back. Clara stood by the creek stone, stamping feeling into her feet, while the little bobcat watched them both from the root hollow. The kit had pulled the corner of the blue blanket closer with one paw, not enough to accept it, only enough to borrow its warmth while pretending she had not needed help at all. Eli noticed and smiled without showing his teeth. "She's got pride," he murmured. "She has more pride than body right now," Clara said. "That can help keep her alive." He moved with the careful patience of a man who had learned that frightened animals read every hurried breath as danger. At 48, Eli had the weathered calm of someone who spent more time with tracks than with small talk. He knelt several feet away, set the crate down, and opened it with a click so soft Clara almost missed it beneath the brook's icy whisper. The bobcat hissed again. It was stronger this time, or maybe Clara only hoped it was. Her ears flattened, her spotted shoulders rose, and her bent whisker pointed forward like a question no human had earned the right to answer. Eli did not reach for her. Instead, he placed a folded towel inside the crate, then a small covered dish near the opening. "Warm water with a little broth scent," he said. "Not too much. She look need a rehabber tonight if we can manage it." The smell drifted through the cold air, faint and savory. The kit's nose twitched. Her eyes narrowed, as if offended that hunger had spoken before dignity could stop it. Clara almost laughed, then swallowed it down. They waited. Snow gathered on Eli's shoulders. Clara Sass's knees ached. Somewhere above them, a branch gave a soft wooden groan and released a curtain of powder. The bobcat stared at the dish, then at Eli, then at Clara, making certain everyone understood that any movement she made would be her own decision. At last she crept forward one in, then another. Her injured paw stayed tucked close, but her body still carried that silent bobcat grace, even weakened. She placed each foot carefully, belly low, ears listening in two directions at once. When her nose reached the dish, she did not drink. She slapped it lightly with one paw first, as if testing whether kindness might spring teeth. The dish wobbled. Clara pressed her lips together. Eli glanced at her, and both of them shared the smallest smile. The kind people allowed themselves only when fear had loosened its grip for 1 second. The kit took one lick. Then she sprang backward so suddenly that she bumped the blue blanket and startled herself. Her tiny tail flicked with outrage. Clara looked down at her boots to hide another smile, because it seemed unfair to laugh at a creature fighting so hard to remain fearsome while wearing snow on her nose. Eli waited until she licked twice more before he gently shifted the crate angle. Not trapping, inviting, making the warm dark inside seem safer than the open cold. It took nearly 40 minutes. By then the sky had gone fully black. Clara's flashlight beam trembled over the roots, not from fear anymore, but from cold. The kit finally limped into the crate after the dish, turned around twice on the towel, and faced outward like a queen receiving enemies. Eli lowered the door slowly. When it latched, the sound seemed too loud for the little trust they had been given. The bobcat threw herself once against the side. Clara flinched. Eli held up a hand. "She'll settle. Better angry than fading." That sentence stayed with Clara long after. Better angry than fading. She thought of how many months she had spent doing the opposite, keeping tidy, staying agreeable, fading politely into the corners of her own life so no one would worry. This little wild creature had no manners for grief. She hissed. She struck. She made her fear known. Clara envied her a little. They carried the crate to Eli's truck, keeping it covered on 3 sides with the blue blanket. The kit growled once when the truck door opened, then went silent, except for the faint scrape of claws against towel. Clara stood in the falling snow and felt suddenly useless. "What happens now?" she asked. "Doctor, Amina Vale will meet us at the rehab shed. Fluids, warmth, quiet. If she makes it through the first night, we'll see." If. The word landed softly and heavily. Clara nodded, but she did not move toward her house. Eli noticed. "You can ride along," he said. "But once we get there, you have to let us work." "Moat can do that." she was not entirely sure it was true. The rehab shed sat behind the ranger station in Alder Creek, a low building that smelled of cedar shavings, clean towels, and the sharp metal scent of winter equipment drying near a heater. Dr. Amina Vale arrived in a red knit hat, with a pom-pom that looked far too cheerful for the hour. She spoke in a whisper, called the Bobcat "Little Madam," and accepted the first hiss as if it were a formal greeting. Clara sat on a bench outside the treatment room, with her hands wrapped around Eli's paper cup of weak coffee. It tasted burnt. It warmed her anyway. Once, Amina stepped out and asked, "Does the blanket belong to you?" "Yes." She settled when we left a corner near the crate. We one tea put it on her, but the smell may help. Clara looked at the closed door. The thought that her old blue blanket, faded by wood smoke and years of winter evenings, might mean even the smallest bit of comfort to that fierce little animal made her throat tighten. "She doesn't have to know it's mine," Clara said. Amina smiled. "I doubt she'll send a thank you card." For the first time that night, Clara laughed fully, though quietly. Eli laughed too, and the sound softened the hallway. Near midnight, they let Clara look through the small observation window. The Bobcat kit lay in a warmed crate, eyes half open, one paw tucked beneath her chest. She was not calm, not tame, not safe in any lasting way, but she was breathing more evenly, and when someone moved too close, her ear with the crescent nick flicked in sharp warning. Clara placed 2 fingers lightly against the glass. 3 feet away, beyond towel, crate, and all the necessary distance between human tenderness and wild fear, the kit blinked once. Clara did not pretend it meant trust, but she let herself believe it meant she had stayed. The first morning after Christmas, Clara returned to the rehab, cheveux capite, had her hair still damp from washing, and her green mug wrapped in both hands. The road down from Hollow Ridge had been glazed in pale ice, and every fence post wore snowcaps. She drove slowly past the school, the dark church, and the little market with its paper bells, taped crookedly in the window, feeling as if the town were sleeping off a holiday she had half attended. Inside the shed, the heater made a low ticking sound. Clean towels warmed on a metal rack. Somewhere in the back, a barred owl, recovering from a wing strain, clicked its beak at the world with solemn disapproval. Clara stood near the doorway and breathed in cedar shavings, disinfectant, and the faint wild musk that seemed to belong to no one animal and every animal at once. "Doctor." Amina Vale met her with 2 fingers raised to her lips. "She made the night," Amina whispered. Clara's eyes closed before she could stop them. It was not joy. Not yet. Joy felt too large and careless for such a thin piece of news. It was relief, small enough to hold without frightening it. Amina led Clara to the observation window where the little bobcat rested in a larger recovery enclosure. Still behind wire, still safely distant from any hands that might mean help but look like threat. The blue blanket had been folded outside one corner, close enough for its scent to drift through, not close enough for claws or teeth to catch. The kit lay on warmed towels with her injured paw stretched in front of her, her crescent-notched ear angled toward the door. "She ate a little," Amina said. "Not from anyone watching. Naturally." "Naturally," Clara murmured. The bobcat opened one eye. It was extraordinary how much suspicion could fit into such a small face. Clara stayed still. She had learned in the school library that children sometimes needed silence before they could admit they did not understand a page. Maybe wild creatures needed something like that too. Not coaxing, not praise, just a quiet room where no one demanded they become less afraid before they were ready. Amina showed Clara where to sit, several feet away from the enclosure, hands in her lap, shoulders relaxed. 10 minutes, she said. No reaching. No talking above a whisper. If she hides, she hides. No. Amina smiled faintly. You know, but your face looks like it wants to knit her a sweater. Clara looked down, embarrassed. It might be a small sweater, she said. The vet's laugh was soft enough not to startle anything. For those 10 minutes, Clara did almost nothing. She watched Deute move through a shaft of winter light. She listened to the heater tick and the owl complain under his breath. She noticed that the bobcat did not sleep like a house cat. Even resting, she was arranged for leaving, paws tucked, shoulders ready, ears collecting information. When a truck passed outside and gravel popped under its tires, the kit lifted her head so fast the towel wrinkled beneath her chest. Then came the first tiny change. It was not dramatic enough that anyone would have filmed it. The kit did not crawl toward Clara. She did not purr. She did not soften into a pet shape. She simply shifted her body, slow as melting ice, until her flank pressed against the side of the enclosure nearest the folded blue blanket. Amina saw it too. Neither woman moved. The bobcat's nose worked once, twice. She drew in the smell of wool, wood smoke, Clara's kitchen, the chair by the stove, the human who had waited beside the brook without grabbing her. Her eyelids lowered halfway. Her tail tip flicked, not in surrender, but in thought. Clara felt something inside her become very quiet. She had spent so much of the past year wishing grief would give her a sign that she was healing. A dinner table that did not accuse her with its empty chair. A carol that did not make her leave the room. But healing, she began to understand, might arrive like this. Not as a leap, not as a bright announcement, but as a frightened creature shifting half an inch toward warmth. Amina wrote notes on a clipboard. Her pen scratched softly. We look need a name for the chart, she said. Temporary, of course. Spoil. Clara looked at the kit, at the crescent ear, the bent whisker, the stubborn little glare returning as if she had realized she had accidentally been comforted. She was found by Miracle Brook, Clara said, and she made it through Christmas night. Amina glanced at her. Miracle? Only for the chart, Clara said, though her voice betrayed her. The name settled into the room without asking permission. Miracle sneezed. It was a tiny, explosive sound, followed by a look of such personal insult that Clara had to press her knuckles against her mouth. Amina turned away to hide a smile. Even the barred owl went silent, as if judging the interruption. After that, Clara came each day before school when the roads allowed, and after school when they did not. She never entered the enclosure. She never touched Miracle. She brought the blue blanket folded in the same square, and sat where the bobcat could see her leave it. Sometimes she read damaged library books aloud in a murmur, not because Miracle understood stories, but because Clara's quiet voice seemed less alarming than footsteps with no pattern. Miracle preferred books with no sudden laughter. She disliked the squeak of Clara's rubber boots. She once batted a pine shaving into her water dish, then stared at it as if Clara had caused the trouble. When Eli peeked in wearing a hat dusted with snow, she gave one sharp hiss, and he tipped the hat like a gentleman corrected. By the end of the week, Miracle no longer flattened completely when Clara entered. By the end of the second, She ate while Clara sat in the chair. And one gray afternoon, while snow tapped gently at the high window, Clara saw the corner of the blue blanket move. Miracle had reached one spotted paw through the safe gap near the folded wool and hooked a single thread with one claw. She pulled it toward her until the fabric touched the wire. Then she rested her cheek near it. Clara looked down at both her hands and did not let herself cry loudly. The moment was too small for noise. But it was enough. By the end of January, Miracle had grown tired of needing anyone. That was how Clara understood it, at least. The little bobcat no longer watched every shadow with the dull exhaustion she had carried from the creek. Her coat had thickened into a richer winter pattern, gray and tawny, with dark rosettes hidden until she moved. The crescent nick in her left ear healed into a permanent moon-shaped notch, her right whisker still bent forward in its strange, questioning way. "Doctor." Amina said the paw was mending well. Eli said the weather would decide the timing more than anyone's feelings. Clara nodded each time, because she respected them both. Then she drove home to Hollow Ridge and folded the blue blanket over the rocking chair, with more care than was necessary. Rehabilitation was not a doorway into possession. Everyone said it gently. Clara already knew. Still, knowledge did not keep the kitchen from feeling larger after her visits. Miracle's next stage began in the outdoor enclosure behind the rehab shed, where spruce branches leaned above the wire roof and snow collected along the edges. Clara was allowed to observe from the path, never close enough to change the work of becoming wild again. The first time Miracle stepped into that cold air, she crouched so low, her belly brushed powder, then lifted her nose and took in winter with one long breath. The change in her was immediate. She was no longer only a patient. She became a small storm to hot paws. She leapt onto the low log platform, missed the first time, pretended she had meant to miss, then sprang again and landed with silent pride. She sniffed every branch Eli had placed inside, rubbed her cheek against the roughest bark, and swatted one dangling strip of cedar with such seriousness that Clara wondered whether it had insulted her family. When a crow called from the roof of the ranger station, Miracle froze, flattened her ears, and stared upward as if taking notes for later revenge. Clara laughed quietly into her scarf. Amina glanced at her. "She's remembering what she is." Clara looked at the spotted body moving through the branches. Maybe she never forgot. After that, the days took on a new rhythm. Clara visited less often, because Amina explained that Miracle needed fewer human patterns, not more. On the mornings she did go, she brought no treats, no toys, no voice bright with hope. She simply stood at the marked place by the fence, hands folded, and let the bobcat decide whether to notice her. Some mornings Miracle did not appear at all. Clara would see only a tail tip sliding behind brush, or the brief lift of one tufted ear above a snow mound. At first, that hurt in a foolish, private way. Then Clara began to feel proud of the absence. A wild animal hiding well was not rejection. It was health. Still, there were moments. One afternoon, wind shook dry snow from the spruce tops and filled the enclosure with glittering dust. Miracle emerged from behind a stump with dead leaves caught between her shoulder blades. She walked 3 steps, felt them move, and spun so quickly that she nearly startled herself. The leaves fell off. Miracle pounced on them, pinned them, then looked toward Clara as if the entire episode had been planned. Clara covered her smile with her mitten. Another day, Eli had left a hollow log in the enclosure. Miracle investigated it by placing both front paws inside, leaving her hindquarters outside and her short tail twitching. She backed out with a cobweb across her nose, sneezed twice, and sat in offended silence. Eli, watching from beside Clara, whispered, "She is going to write me a complaint." "She will use very sharp punctuation," Clara replied. Those small exchanges warmed the cold path. They did not make Miracle tame. If anything, they made her wildness easier to love correctly. Clara could admire her without asking her to become soft. She could feel tenderness without turning it into ownership. At home, the Bobcat's absence became strangely present. Clara stopped setting the blue blanket near the door and returned it to the rocking chair. She repaired the loose seam along one edge, though Miracle had only ever pulled a few threads. She swept the porch and noticed prints with a sharper eye. Squirrel, cat, rabbit. Once near the woodpile, she found a neat bobcat track pressed into old snow and knelt there long enough for cold to seep through her knee. It was not Miracle's, the size was wrong. But it made her smile anyway. Mr. Pickwick resumed his visits once the drama appeared to have moved elsewhere. He strutted across Clara's porch with the dignity of a creature who had personally restored order. One morning, he discovered his reflection in the storm door and puffed so round that Clara almost dropped her toast. "You brave old fool," she told him, and he answered by sitting on David's old boot scraper as if it were a throne. The house breathed differently through those weeks. Clara still missed David in the old places, at the wood stove, beside the truck, in the empty space where a second voice should have commented on the weather. But Miracle had taught her to listen for another kind of presence. Not one that filled the silence, but one that moved through it honestly. By mid-February, Amina began saying the word release. Miracle was climbing strongly, hunting practice prey with clean instinct, avoiding human approach, and marking the logs with confident cheek rubs. Her paw no longer favored one side unless the snow was deep. Her eyes had lost the dull film of exhaustion and held that alert, measuring light Clara had seen in wild things at the tree line. The plan was made for land beyond Hollow Ridge, near protected forest and far from the road. Close enough to the valley she had known, far enough to give her room. On the last morning, Clara visited the enclosure. Frost silvered the fence wire, and the sky shone pale as milk. Miracle sat on the highest platform, paws tucked, watching Clara through the branches. She did not come down. Clara was grateful. It made leaving possible. She lifted one hand only halfway. Not a wave, not a command. Just a small shape in the cold air. Miracle's bent whisker twitched. Then she turned her head toward the forest wind. Clara went home with the blue blanket waiting on the rocking chair and the ache of doing the right thing walking quietly beside her. The release did not happen the first week they planned it. A late storm came down from the north and closed the ridge road under white drifts. Then another followed with sleet that sealed every branch in glass. Eli said there was no sense sending a young bobcat into weather that made even old foxes stay tucked beneath roots. Amina agreed, though Miracle disagreed. Vekepite had everyone by pacing the outdoor enclosure until her tracks made a narrow oval in the snow. She was stronger now, and strength made her impatient. Clara visited only when asked to help carry supplies or mend towels. She kaapete her distance from the enclosure, but she could hear Miracle moving inside it. The soft thump onto a platform, the scrape of bark under claws, the sudden hush when the bobcat noticed human steps. Once, when Clara passed the fence with a bucket of clean water, Miracle dropped from a branch without a sound and landed in a drift so neatly that only her ear tips showed for one startled second. Eli laughed under his breath. Ambush practice. "She looks like a snowbank with opinions," Clara whispered. The ear tips vanished. That spring, when the thaw finally softened the creek edges and the maples showed red buds, Miracle was released on protected land above Hollow Ridge. Clara was not invited to stand close, and she did not ask. She waited farther down the trail with Nora Bell, who had brought a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of cinnamon rolls, shaped so unevenly they looked homemade by moonlight. When the crate door opened, Miracle did not burst out dramatically. She waited. She sniffed. She let the woods enter her first. Then she slipped between two young spruces, her spotted coat breaking into shadow and light, her tail tip flicking once before she disappeared. Clara had expected to cry. Instead, she smiled. It surprised her so much that Nora touched her sleeve. "You all right?" "Yes," Clara said, watching the empty place between the trees. Mort think that was the first thing she ever did that needed nothing from me. All through summer, Clara did not see Miracle. She told herself this was good news and mostly believed it. The woods grew loud kep ite hot insects. The brook ran clear over stone, and the porch lantern stayed unlit until dusk came early again. Clara returned to her school library, where the children tracked grass clippings across the floor and argued tenderly over who got the book about constellations. At home, she repaired the broken porch step at last. Not perfectly. The new board sat a shade too pale beside the old ones, and the first time she stepped on it, it gave a small complaining creak. Clara patted the rail and said, "Don T, start." Mort Met knew at this. Mr. Pickwick inspected the repair, placed one orange paw on the board, then withdrew it as if the workmanship offended him personally. By autumn, Clara began finding signs she did not speak of too quickly. A neat print in mud beside Miracle Brook, a scrape near the old stone wall, a tuft of gray-brown fur caught on low cedar bark. Not proof exactly. The forest did not owe proof. But each small sign warmed her in a way she carried privately, like a coal tucked under ash. Then December returned. Snow came early that year, not harshly, but with patience. It settled on the school roof, on Nora S. knitted mailbox hat, on the woodpile where Mr. Pickwick left one set of prints and pretended they belonged to a larger, braver animal. Clara hung cedar over the mantel and set David S. peppermint tin beside the stove. She did not fill it. She only cockapete it there because some empty things deserved a place. On Christmas Eve, she lit the porch lantern at dusk. There was no reason to expect anything. She had made a small supper of potato soup and brown bread. Nora had dropped off cookies shaped like stars, though one had lost a point in transit, and Clara decided it was still trying its best. Matthew had called from Burlington between shifts, his voice tired and kind. He promised to visit after New Year's, and Clara believed him without needing more. After the call, the house settled. The wood stove clicked. The cedar wreath brushed the door in the wind. The blue blanket lay over the rocking chair, faded and neatly folded, holding nothing now but memory. Clara carried her mug to the window. The snow outside was bright in the porch lantern, each flake falling through the amber circle before disappearing into blue dusk. She thought of David then, but softly, not with the old sharpness. She thought of him teaching Matthew to hang tinsel, strand by strand, of his whistle drifting from the shed, of the way he had once said wild animals noticed more mercy than people thought. A faint sound came from the porch rail. Clara froze. At first there was only snow. Then a shadow moved beneath the steps, low and fluid. A bobcat emerged into the lantern light, larger than the kit by the creek, lean and winter-coated, with a crescent notch in her left ear and one whisker bending forward like a question. Miracle. Clara's hand covered her mouth. The bobcat did not come to the door. She did not ask for food. She stood beside the repaired step, sniffed the pale new board with cautious disapproval, and placed one paw on it. It creaked. Miracle sprang backward. Clara made a small sound that was half laugh, half sob. Miracle crouched, offended by the board, the porch, and perhaps engineering as a whole. Then, after a long moment, she approached the rail. She rubbed her cheek against the wood. Slowly. Once. The motion was not affection in the human way. It was scent, territory, memory, and choice. It was wild language, brief and private, but Clara understood enough. The bobcat had found her way back to the edge of warmth without being called, and she had marked the porch not as a cage, not as a home that owned her, but as a place worth remembering. Clara did not open the door. She only turned off the kitchen light, leaving the lantern to hold the snow around Miracle like a small golden room. The bobcat sat for 7 quiet minutes. Clara counted without meaning to. Miracle watched the yard, the trees, the roofline, never fully relaxing. A mouse moved under the porch, and her ears snapped toward it with such sharp focus that Clara almost apologized to the mouse. Then Miracle rose, shook snow from her pale muzzle with the same irritated snap Clara remembered, and slipped back toward the spruce shadows. Clara stayed at the window long after she had gone. For the first Christmas in years, the quiet house did not feel empty. It felt visited. After that first Christmas Eve return, Clara tried to live as if nothing impossible had happened. She went back to the school library when winter break ended. She stamped due dates into chapter books, untangled scarves from chairbacks, and reminded second graders that bookmarks were kinder than turning pages face down. She shoveled the porch. She told Nora Bell only part of the story at first, because some memories felt bruised when handled too soon. But the ridge knew. The snow beneath Clara's porch held Miracle's tracks until the next wind filled them in. Mr. Pickwick discovered them 2 mornings later, sniffed one print, widened his eyes, and walked backward with such grave dignity that Clara nearly spilled ashes from the stove bucket. Nora, who had come to borrow nutmeg, leaned on the rail and said, "That cat has better manners than half the people at town meeting." "She is not a cat," Clara said automatically. Nora gave her a sideways look. "Mote no. That's why Mott said it from up here." Through January and February, Clara saw no more of Miracle, but the visit changed the way the house listened. Some nights, Clara woke before dawn and heard only pines rubbing together, snow settling from the roof, and distant ice cracking in Miracle Brook. Hope had become careful in her again, not loud, not demanding, but present, like a lantern left trimmed for weather. When spring came, the signs became clearer. Near the creek path, where the ground softened into dark mud, Clara found paw prints that moved along the stone wall and vanished beneath the low cedar. No claw marks, rounded toes, a heel pad broad and silent looking. She knelt beside them and felt the same quiet lift in her chest she had felt at the observation window long ago. Miracle had survived the hardest months. That should have been enough. Yet the signs that followed were not simple comfort, they were restless. In late April, Eli found scratch marks high on a leaning birch. In May, Nora's hens stopped wandering near the back pasture before dusk, though none were taken. In June, Clara heard a rough, low yowl from the ridge above the brook, not pain, not fear, but a wild territorial call that rolled through the trees. Clara stood by the sink, hands wet with dishwater, listening until the night closed around the sound. "She's making a life," Eli told her when he came by to check trail cameras. That means boundaries. Mates. Hunting paths. Den sites. We might see more movement for a while. Clara nodded. She understood the words. She even admired them. But part of her still remembered the kitten pressing her cheek near the blue blanket, and that part had trouble making room for claws on birch bark and night calls that belonged to no human grief. She sounds so alone, Clara said. Eli looked toward the spruce line. Maybe. Or maybe she sounds like she knows where she stands. That answer stayed with Clara because it did not comfort her cheaply. Summer thickened over Hollow Ridge. Ferns rose along the creek, and the air smelled of wet stone and warm pine needles. Clara kept the porch swept, though pollen returned each afternoon. Mr. Pickwick slept under the lilac bush and pretended not to chase moths in his dreams. Once, Clara set a bowl of blueberries on the porch table, went inside for cream, and returned to find a chipmunk sitting in the bowl like a tiny landlord. She laughed. Miracle did not visit. But sometimes, just after dusk, Clara saw movement at the far edge of the yard. A low shape slipping between raspberry canes, a tail tipped dark against the green. Once, the pale flash of a muzzle turned toward the porch light before disappearing. Clara never followed. She never called. She let the space between them remain honest. By autumn, Miracle S signs grew sharper again. A strong, musky scent clung to the lower porch rail one morning, left there during the night, without so much as a paw print in the frost. Clara smiled despite herself, because Miracle had apparently decided the repaired step remained suspicious, but the rail deserved official notice. Another morning, she found the doormat dragged crooked, not far, only enough to look deliberate. Mr. Pickwick sat beside it with such innocence that Clara blamed him aloud, and his offended tail flick made the lie almost believable. Then came the stare. It happened 3 weeks before Christmas, after the first serious snow of the season. Clara had been carrying kindling from the shed, the armload pressed against her coat and smelling of sap. The sky was lavender vey kepi-tehat early evening. The porch lantern had just clicked on. Miracle stood beyond the woodpile. She was larger again, fuller with winter coat, her shoulders powerful, her left ear notch black against the snow. She did not come closer. She only stared toward the house, then toward the woods beyond Miracle Brook, then back again. Her tail moved in short, tight flicks. Her ears turned, catching sounds Clara could not hear. Once she lifted one front paw and held it suspended, not from injury, but from indecision. Clara lowered the kindling slowly. "Hello, little Miracle," she whispered. The Bobcat-esque gaze passed over her, steady and unreadable. Then Miracle turned away and marked the side of the woodpile with her cheek, hard enough to shake loose a puff of snow. She did it again, more urgently. Afterward, she paced a short line between the logs and the spruce shadow, back and forth, leaving a dark chain of prints. Clara felt unease gather beneath her ribs. Not fear of Miracle. Never that. Fear for her. The forest behind the brook seemed to hold its breath. Even Mr. Pickwick, watching from the kitchen window, did not perform outrage. He simply sat vacipte, his round face close to the glass, whiskers glowing in the lamplight, as if he too understood that the yard had become a place of decision. At last Miracle stopped. She looked once at the porch lantern. Then she melted into the trees without a sound. Clara stood in the cold with kindling against her chest until her fingers began to ache. That night she left the lantern burning later than usual. She did not know what she was waiting for. only that the ridge had changed its tone, and somewhere beyond the creek, a wild heart was measuring distances Clara could not cross. The storm arrived the way mountain storms sometimes did. Vekepite had no grand announcement at first, only a change in the smell of the air. By supper, the kitchen windows had gone black around their edges. Wind pressed against the house, eased off, then came back harder, testing every seam David had once caulked. Vekepite had patient hands. Clara stood at the sink, rinsing her soup bowl, and watched snow begin to move sideways through the porch lamp's light. It was not the soft Christmas snow that made the yard seem gentle. This snow had teeth in it. It struck the glass in dry little taps and skittered across the porch boards like thrown salt. Clara thought of Miracle beyond the brook. She knew better than to imagine the Bobcat helpless. Miracle belonged to weather more than Clara ever would. She had hollow logs, spruce cover, stone ledges, and every old instinct tucked into her bones. Still, the memory of that lifted paw by the woodpile would not leave Clara alone. The house gave a long creak. Mr. Pickwick had somehow chosen that night to visit, and now regretted everything. He sat inside the mudroom on an old towel, brought there by Nora before the road worsened. His orange fur puffed around him while he stared at the door, as if personally disappointed in the entire sky. When thunder rolled far off, strange and muffled inside the snowstorm, he tucked his paws beneath himself and pretended he had meant to become a loaf. "You may stay until morning," Clara told him. He blinked once, accepting her service. That small foolishness warmed the room for a moment. Clara laid one extra log in the stove. She checked the flashlight batteries. She filled the kettle, because storms made people do practical things when worry offered no work. Then she turned the kitchen light off and stood by the window. The lantern outside swung wildly. Each gust made the shadows jump. The repaired porch step vanished under blown snow, reappeared, vanished again. The lilac bayouhat bent low, its bare branches scratching the air. Beyond the yard, the spruce line was only a dark wall. Then something moved near the woodpile. Clara leaned closer. A shape slipped through the white blur, low and powerful, then stopped beside the maple logs. Miracle's ear tufts flattened in the wind. Snow clung along her back and pale muzzle. She rubbed her cheek hard against the woodpile once, then turned toward the porch with her tail lashing in short, troubled movements. Clara's hand rose to the glass. Miracle did not come nearer. Instead, she looked back toward the brook. The bobcat's mouth opened slightly, not in a cry Clara could hear through the storm, but in scenting the air. Her whiskers flared. Her body tightened. For a heartbeat, she seemed torn between the house light and the forest dark, between memory and something deeper than memory. Clara understood nothing, except that Miracle was asking the night a question. A sharp crack came from the ridge above the creek. A branch, maybe. Ice splitting. The storm swallowed the sound almost at once. Miracle spun toward it. "Don't go," Clara whispered, though she knew the words were for herself. Miracle bounded into the snow. Her body disappeared in 3 leaps, swallowed by spruce shadow and blowing white. The last thing Clara saw was the dark tip of her tail cutting across the lantern light. Then nothing. For a long while, Clara stayed at the window. The mug beside her cooled untouched. Mr. Pickwick came into the kitchen, shook one damp paw, and gave a low complaint as if Clara were responsible for making wild things unreasonable. She reached down and scratched the air above his head, not touching, because he disliked sudden generosity. "Motkano ve kep," she said. Near midnight, the power flickered. The radio clicked off, returned, then faded into static. Clara lit the old oil lamp David had kept in the pantry, the one with a tiny dent along the brass rim. Its flame made the room smaller and older. She carried it from window to window, not because she expected to see miracle, but because standing still became unbearable. The storm worsened after that. Wind drove snow beneath the porch roof and piled it against the door. The gate latch banged until Clara tied it with a strip torn from a worn dishcloth. When she opened the door to do it, the cold shoved into the house so fiercely that Mr. Pickwick fled under the table. The porch boards were slick beneath her boots. The air smelled of frozen bark and something metallic, like the inside of a cloud. She looked toward the creek. Nothing. Only white. By morning, the storm had moved east, leaving the ridge under a silence so complete it felt stunned. The world outside had been remade without asking. Snow lay in sculpted drifts against the shed. The lilac beuet hat had bent nearly to the ground. One spruce near the brook had lost a heavy limb, its broken place bright and raw against the dark trunk. Clara pulled on boots and David's wool coat before the coffee finished. The porch step was buried. She cleared it with a broom. Slowly. Heart-thudding hat time bristles struck wood. Beneath the rail, where Miracle had marked the house on other nights, the snow was crusted and broken. Tracks crossed there, half filled by wind, hard to read. A bobcat had been there. Then the trail led toward the brook, vanished beneath drifted powder, appeared again by the fallen spruce, and ended where broken branches had swept the snow clean. Clara stood beside the tree until her cheeks burned with cold. She found no fur snagged on bark, no blood, no sign of a struggle she could name. Only silence, storm damage, and the absence of a creature who had always known how to disappear. Eli came later, walking in snowshoes from the road because his truck could not make the hill. He studied the tracks with his quiet Ranger-S face, then looked toward the ridge. "She may have moved territory," he said gently. "Storms can shift everything." Clara nodded. A chickadee landed on the split spruce limb and shook snow from its tiny head, absurdly alive in the middle of all that worry. Clara almost smiled. Then she saw the place beneath the porch rail again, scraped by paws, empty now. For the first time since Miracle's return, the lantern looked less like welcome and more like waiting. That evening, Clara lit it anyway. For 3 days after the storm, Clara moved through the valley with the care of someone carrying a brimful bowl. She taught children how to return books to the right shelves. She smiled when Owen Miller tried to check out the same dinosaur book for the 6th week in a row. She taped torn pages and reminded herself that bandages worked only when used gently. All the while, part of her stayed beside the broken spruce. At home, she walked the creek path twice each day, once before school and once at dusk. The snow made every sound small. Her boots squeaked. Her breath worked in pale clouds. The brook muttered under ice, hidden but alive, and the wind sent loose crystals rattling through dead ferns like tiny beads. She found tracks, but none that answered her. Fox, with its neat line of prints like careful stitching. Deer, deep and pointed near the salt lick Nora kept too close to her garden. Squirrel, chaotic and busy, ending at a maple where bark flakes scattered like crumbs. Mr. Pickwick's round paw marks looped around the woodpile and stopped at the porch, where he had remembered his courage had limits. No crescent-eared bobcat. Eli came when he could. He walked the ridge with binoculars against his chest and a notebook in his pocket, reading the snow in a way Clara admired and feared. He showed her how wind could erase a trail from one direction while preserving a rabbit print beside it. He pointed out where a bobcat might pass under hemlock branches without leaving much sign. She could be close, he said. Clara heard what he did not say. She could also be far. Nora Bell joined one afternoon in a purple hat with a pom-pom that bounced every time she stepped. She brought a thermos of tea sweetened too heavily with honey and insisted Clara drink from the little metal cup. "You look like a ghost who forgot her sheet," Nora said. Clara managed a tired smile. "That is not your best comfort." "It was never my best talent." They stood near Miracle Brook while snowmelt dripped from the broken spruce limb in slow, shining drops. Nora did not tell Clara to be sensible. She did not say Miracle was only an animal. She only brushed snow from a fallen branch, looked toward the trees and said, "Wild things have reasons we re not invited to understand." Clara wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Moot no. But knowing did not stop the ache. It had roots now, running through all the places Miracle had touched without entering fully. The porch rail, the blue blanket, the creek bank, the repaired step she distrusted. Clara began to understand that love at a distance did not hurt less, simply because it was wise. One evening, Matthew drove down from Burlington after his shift, arriving with hospital tiredness under his eyes and a paper bag of groceries on the passenger seat. He hugged Clara in the mudroom, careful not to squeeze too hard because she was still wearing her coat. "You should have called sooner," he said. "Mo day note want you driving in weather." "Mom." That one word held all his worry. He stayed the night. Together, they searched the lower pasture at sunrise. Matthew tall and quiet beside her, his boots too city clean until Hollow Ridge mud corrected them. He had heard the miracle stories for years, but he had only glimpsed her once, a shadow beneath the lantern, when he came late for New Year's. Still, he looked with the seriousness of someone searching for family. At the creek, he found a feather caught in ice and held it up gently. "Clue?" he asked. "Crow," Clara said. "And the crow probably has opinions about us touching it." Matthew tucked it back where he found it, then Mort apologized to the crow. The small joke warmed her more than she expected. That afternoon they checked Eli's trail camera near the stone wall. It held images of blowing snow, a fox with bright eyes, 3 deer moving like nervous ghosts, and one magnificent close-up of Mr. Pickwick's face as he investigated the lens. Matthew laughed so hard he had to sit on a stump. "He looks like he's filing a complaint." "He files several daily," Clara said. Then the laughter passed, leaving the empty frames after it. No miracle. No pale muzzle. No notched ear. On the 5th night, Clara woke before dawn to a sound she thought was a call. She sat upright in bed, heart pounding, while the house held darkness around her. There it was again, low, rough, far away. She hurried to the window. The moon lit the yard blue. The porch lantern had gone out, its bulb finally spent after years of winter service. The darkness beneath it seemed sudden and wrong. Clara stood barefoot on the cold floor and listened until the sound came once more from across the ridge. Not a bobcat. A barred owl. Its call drifted through the trees, mournful and questioning, and Clara pressed her palm to the window frame. In the morning, she replaced the bulb with shaking fingers. The new one glowed too cleanly at first, without the soft amber age of the old lantern. Clara stood on the repaired step and looked at it, feeling the unreasonable sting of another small change she had not been ready for. Mr. Pickwick appeared below, sat in the snow, and sneezed. "Oh, don't start," she told him. He blinked, as if the entire grief of the household could have been avoided with proper feline management. Days stretched into weeks. The trail cameras showed coyotes on the far ridge, deer nosing through crusted snow, and one young bobcat Clara did not recognize, crossing a logging road at midnight with no notch in its ear. Eli said that was good habitat. Clara nodded. Good habitat did not feel like an answer. By the time Christmas Eve approached the following year, Clara had stopped speaking Miracle's name aloud every day. That was not forgetting. It was how she learned to carry hope without bruising it. Still, each dusk she lit the porch lantern. The blue blanket remained folded over the rocking chair. The green mug waited beside the stove. The broken spruce slowly weathered silver by the brook. And Clara, who had once believed the worst loneliness was being left, began to understand a quieter kind, loving something enough to let it vanish, then continuing to prepare a welcome it might never need again. The first Christmas Eve after Miracle vanished, Clara kept the lantern burning until dawn. Nothing came but snow. She had not expected the bobcat to appear simply because the calendar asked her to. She told herself that while she swept the porch and ladled soup into a bowl she barely tasted. But expectation was not the same as hope, and hope had a way of sitting quietly in the corner even after being told to leave. At midnight, Nora carried in shortbread trees, leaning as if a storm had passed through the bakery too. Mr. Pickwick followed her inside, shook snow from one paw, and chose David's old chair, as if the family had been keeping it warm. "She may be busy being wild," Nora said. Clara nodded. "Mort hope she is." And she meant it. That was the hardest part. Winter moved on. Then spring. Then years. Matthew married Elise. Nora's knees grew troublesome, but her tongue remained in excellent condition. Mr. Pickwick became rounder, slower, and more convinced that every sunny patch existed because he had ordered it. Hollow Ridge kept its seasons: mud, black flies, hay dust, frost. Miracle Brook swelled in April and whispered thinly in August. The broken spruce by the creek lost bark until it stood silver and smooth as old bone. Clara still walked there, though not every day. She learned to look without pleading. She learned to accept tracks as tracks, shadows as shadows. But every Christmas Eve, she lit the porch lantern. Just at dusk, when the first blue came into the snow and the windows began giving back the kitchen, she checked the bulb, swept the step, placed the green mug on the sill, and turned off the kitchen light. Some years Matthew and Elise visited with their little boy Samuel, who called the lantern the moon on the porch. Some years weather kept them in Burlington, and Clara spent the evening with Cedar, soup, and the stove. Miracle did not come. Clara grew older around the waiting. Her hair turned white. Her hands stiffened on cold mornings. She retired from the school library, though children still waved from the bus. Then came the fourth Christmas Eve after the storm. The day had been clear and bitter. By late afternoon, snow began falling in wide, slow flakes. Clara had spent the day alone, but not unhappily. Matthew's family would arrive the next morning. Nora had sent ginger cookies shaped like bells, one of which had lost its clapper and looked surprised about it. Mr. Pickwick, ancient now, had visited long enough to sniff the hearth, reject a cushion, and leave orange hairs on 3 chairs. At dusk, Clara lit the lantern. The bulb warmed to amber, catching each flake as it passed. The repaired porch step creaked beneath her slipper when she stepped back inside. The kitchen smelled of cloves and wood smoke. On the rocking chair, the blue blanket lay folded over one arm, thinner now, but still holding its faded square of color against the winter room. Clara ate a little soup. She washed the bowl. She set 2 cookies on a plate, then laughed softly and put one back. Greedy, she told herself. The word sounded kind in the empty room. Around 9, the wind stilled. The pines stopped rubbing together. The wreath stopped brushing the door. Even the old house seemed to pause with one breath held in its walls. Then came the sound. Not a knock. Not the gate latch. A soft, compact pressure in snow. Clara's hand, resting on the edge of the sink, went still. Another step. She turned slowly toward the window. At first, she saw only the lantern light and the falling snow, gentle as ash. Then, beyond the repaired step, a shape stood where shadow met porch glow. Low, broad-shouldered, half silver in winter coat, half tawny under the amber light. The bobcat lifted her head. Clara did not move. The clock ticked above the stove. A log settled in the fire with a sigh. Her breath trembled once, then steadied, because she knew better than to startle a miracle that had already crossed so much dark. The left ear held the crescent notch. The right whisker still bent forward. But Miracle was older, not old, only changed by years that had belonged properly to the forest. Her muzzle was paler. A faint line marked one shoulder where fur grew differently. Her eyes were the same deep gold green, watchful and private, but they carried more distance now, as if she had traveled through storms Clara would never know. For several heartbeats, Miracle stared at the window. Then she stepped onto the porch. The repaired board creaked. Miracle froze. Clara's mouth pressed into a smile so fragile it hurt. The bobcat lifted the offending paw and looked down at the board with the same grave suspicion she had shown years before. She sniffed it once, sneezed, and turned her head aside, as if Clara's carpentry had personally disappointed her across time. Miracle moved to the rail. She rubbed her cheek against the weathered wood, once, twice, slowly enough that snow fell from her ear tuft. Then she lowered her head and sniffed the place where the blue blanket had once been carried past, where human hands had rested, where years of welcome had gathered without becoming a trap. Clara did not cry loudly. The sound in her chest was quieter than that. She thought of the kitten beneath the fallen spruce, all hiss and frost. She thought of the recovery shed, the paw through the wire, the last glimpse between young spruces. She thought of every Christmas Eve when nothing came, and how those nights had not been wasted after all. Miracle sat beneath the lantern. Snow settled along her back. Her ears turned toward the brook, then toward the road, then toward Clara's breathing inside the glass. She remained there for only a few minutes, but the minutes felt wide enough to hold all the years between them. Before leaving, the bobcat stepped to the porch edge, looked back at the window, and touched her nose lightly to the lower rail where frost had gathered. It left a small dark oval in the white. Then she turned and slipped into the spruce shadows, silent and sure. Clara stood in the dim kitchen with the blue blanket behind her and the green mug on the sill, knowing no one would ever explain why Miracle had chosen that night. But she no longer needed the explanation. The forest had remembered. After Miracle's return, Clara did not tell the story quickly. She carried it for 2 whole days like something warm held inside her coat. On Christmas morning, when Matthew arrived with Elise and little Samuel, she served coffee, warmed cinnamon rolls, and watched her grandson arrange toy animals along the windowsill in a solemn parade. A bear faced the sugar bowl, a rabbit guarded the salt, a wooden fox stood beside the green mug as if it had always belonged there. Only after supper, when Samuel had fallen asleep under a quilt on the couch and the house smelled of roasted carrots, pine sap, and melted candle wax, did Clara point to the lower porch rail. "She came back," she said. Matthew turned slowly from the sink. "Miracle?" Clara nodded. No one rushed to the window, and she loved them for that. Elise only set down the towel in her hands. Matthew crossed the room and stood beside his mother, both of them looking through the glass at the faint dark oval where Miracle's nose had touched frost. The mark had nearly faded, but Clara could still see it because she knew where to look. Samuel stirred in his sleep and mumbled something about a fox needing mittens. Elise smiled. "That sounds urgent." The small laughter that followed did not break the moment. It softened it. Clara called Eli the next morning, not because Miracle needed help, but because respect required truth. Eli came up after lunch, boots knocking snow from the porch step, and examined the tracks with his ranger-esque quiet patience. He crouched near the rail, gloved fingers hovering above the cheek rub mark without touching it. "She looks healthy," he said at last. "Older, but strong." Clara breathed in slowly. The air smelled of thawing snow and wood smoke. Modé Desnote put food out. "Good." Modé Desnote opened the door. "Better." Mott wanted to. Eli looked up, and his face gentled. "That's the part that makes you human." Clara tucked her hands into her sleeves. "And not doing it? That's the part that lets her stay wild." Those words settled into Clara more deeply than praise would have. They became a kind of rule she could live beside. No cage. No hand reaching through the dark. No bowl placed like a question the Bobcat might feel obliged to answer. Only the lantern, the quiet house, and the right to leave. Over the following weeks, Clara noticed herself changing in small, almost hidden ways. She stopped waiting every evening, though she still glanced out when the porch boards creaked. She repaired the loose hinge on the pantry door, instead of talking about repairing it. She took David's old peppermint tin from the stove shelf, washed it, dried it carefully, and filled it with buttons, because usefulness felt kinder than shrine-making. The blue blanket remained on the rocking chair, but she no longer touched it like a relic. She used it on cold mornings, tucking it around her knees while reading beside the stove. The first time she did, she laughed at herself. "Well," she murmured, "if Miracle objects, she may file a formal complaint." Mr. Pickwick, lying in a patch of winter sun, opened one eye as if prepared to assist with paperwork. Miracle did not come again that season, not to be seen. But once, after a powdery snowfall, Clara found a clean line of bobcat tracks along the far edge of the yard. They passed near the woodpile, paused by the repaired step, and continued toward Miracle Brook. No circling, no distress, just passage. Clara stood there in her boots and night sweater, cold air slipping down her collar, and felt no sharp grief. The tracks did not say stay. They said alive. That was enough for that morning. In March, Clara began volunteering twice a week at the library again, though she had retired. The new librarian, Tessa Boyd, was young enough to use phrases Clara did not understand, and kind enough not to reorganize the picture books too boldly. Clara read aloud during the after-school hour. Her voice, once thin from disuse, grew steady again. Children leaned against beanbags, while snowmelt dripped from their boots, and one little girl named May asked whether wild animals could remember people. Clara closed the book gently. "Sometimes," she said. "But remembering is not the same as belonging." May considered this with grave attention, then whispered, "My hamster remembers crackers." "That may be a different category of love," Clara said. The children accepted this. By spring, the ridge softened. Miracle Brook loosened its ice and began speaking over stones again. Clara walked to the broken spruce with Eli one bright afternoon when the air smelled of wet bark and old leaves. Fern tips curled from the ground like tiny green questions. At the place where she had first heard the wheatgrasp years before, Clara paused. She expected sorrow. What came instead was gratitude so quiet it almost passed unnoticed. She remembered the frightened kit, the hiss, the blue blanket, laid near but not over her. She remembered wanting to gather the little body close and make promises no human had the right to make. If Clara had loved poorly then, Miracle might not have returned to the forest. If she had loved fearfully later, the porch might have become a trap instead of a memory. "She saved something in me," Clara said. Eli did not answer right away. A chickadee called from a branch above them, bold as a bell. Then he said, "Maybe you saved each other differently." Clara smiled. That sounds like something too wise for a man who once got chased by Norah's rooster. He was unusually organized. They laughed there beside the creek, and the laugh moved through the trees without startling anything. That evening, Clara lit the porch lantern not from worry, but from welcome. She turned off the kitchen light and let the glass hold darkness on her side. Outside, moths came early to the amber glow, foolish and delicate. The repaired step creaked when the wind shifted. The lower rail shone faintly, where years of weather, handprints, and bobcat scent had all become part of the same worn wood. Clara sat in the rocking chair with the blue blanket around her knees and the green mug cooling beside her. She did not feel empty. She did not feel finished either. She felt open, like the door of a house left closed for safety, but warmed from within, waiting for whatever the night chose to bring, and peaceful enough if it brought nothing at all. The first time Clara saw the two smaller shadows, she almost mistook them for tricks of evening. It was late May, the hour when Hollow Ridge turned green at the edges and gold in the middle. Rain had passed through after lunch, leaving the porch boards dark and the lilac leaves shining. The air smelled of wet soil, spruce sap, and cut grass from Norah's field. Miracle Brook was running full, not angry, only lively, speaking over stones in quick silver notes. Clara had been on the porch shelling peas into a chipped white bowl. Mr. Pickwick, older than dignity preferred to admit, slept on the far end of the step with one paw hanging off, dreaming in little twitches. Every so often a pea escaped Clara's fingers and bounced across the board. Mr. Pickwick opened one eye, judged it inedible, and returned to the serious work of retirement. Then a robin gave a hard alarm call from the spruce line. Clara lifted her head. At first, she saw Miracle alone, standing where the creek path curved behind the ferns. The bobcat was nearly hidden by new green, but Clara knew the shape of her now, the level back, The pale muzzle, the notched ear, the tail held love kepi to hat its dark tip. Miracle did not step into the yard. She stood at the boundary, watching the house, as if measuring the years again. Clara set the bowl down slowly. "Hello, little Miracle," she whispered. Miracle's ears moved, but her gaze did not soften. She was no porch visitor that evening. She was alert, purposeful, listening behind herself. Then the ferns trembled. A smaller bobcat shape slipped out behind her, all legs, spots, and enormous paws that seemed borrowed from a future body. A second followed a heartbeat later, darker along the back, and bolder by exactly one foolish step. They stopped when Miracle stopped. Their ears were too large for them. Their faces carried the serious confusion of young wild things, discovering that the world contained both rules and smells. Clara's breath caught so quietly that even Miss Pickwick did not wake. Kittens. Not tiny, not helpless, but young enough to make the ferns look like a forest built for them. One had a pale smudge over the nose. The other had a dark stripe along one cheek and the habit of looking at everything sideways before deciding whether it was dangerous or interesting. Miracle turned her head and gave a low sound Clara felt more than heard. Both youngsters froze. The bolder one froze with one paw still lifted, which made him look as though he had been caught reaching for a cookie. Clara pressed a hand gently to her mouth. It was not laughter she wanted to hide exactly. It was wonder trying to become too large. Miracle had not returned alone because she needed Clara. She had returned because life had continued. The thought entered Clara slowly, like warm light moving across a floor. All those years of letting go, all those Christmas Eves of lantern and silence had not ended in absence. Somewhere beyond the brook, under ledges and roots, and weather Clara would never see, Miracle had become what she was meant to become. She had learned the territory. She had survived winters. She had carried young into the world and kept them alive long enough to bring them to the edge of an old memory. One kitten lowered its head and sniffed a wet fern. A drop of rainwater fell onto its nose. It startled backward into its sibling, and both sprang apart as if the fern had attacked. Mr. Pickwick woke at the commotion, saw 3 bobcats at the yard's edge, and very carefully closed his eyes again, choosing peace with the wisdom of age. Clara nearly smiled aloud. Miracle heard the small breath of it. Her head turned toward the porch. There was no pleading in her face, no tame recognition, no invitation to come closer. But she did not leave. She watched Clara for several long seconds, then rubbed her cheek against a young spruce trunk. The kittens watched, then copied her with less grace. The darker one rubbed so hard he nearly tipped himself over. The pale-nosed one chose the wrong side of the sapling and bumped his forehead on a twig. The warmth of it moved through Clara's chest until it hurt. She wanted Matthew there. She wanted Samuel, who would have whispered too loudly and named them both before anyone could stop him. She wanted David, whose hand would have found hers without a word. For one brief second, wanting opened like an old door. Then it closed gently. This moment had come to the person who had waited quietly enough to receive it. That did not make the absent less loved. It only made the present more delicate. Clara did not reach for her phone. She did not call Nora across the road. She did not stand. The peas rested in the bowl, bright green and unfinished. The porch lantern, unneeded in the long spring light, hung above her like a sleeping star. She let the Bobcat family remain unclaimed by witness. Miracle moved first. She took 3 steps along the tree line, paused, and looked back at the kittens. The pale-nosed one obeyed, trotting after her with high, careful feet. The darker one lingered to sniff the air toward the porch. His whiskers trembled. He opened his mouth slightly, tasting the scent of old wood, human, orange cat, cedar wreath long gone, and whatever invisible mark Miracle had left across the years. Miracle made the low sound again. This time the youngster bounded after her, tripped over a fern stem, recovered with great dignity, and vanished behind his mother. Only when the last tail tip disappeared did Clara realize her eyes were wet. Mr. Pickwick opened one eye again. "You saw them," Clara whispered. The old cat yawned, stretched one paw, and gave the bowl of peas a look suggesting the event had delayed supper. Clara laughed softly then, alone on the damp porch, while the brook ran bright below and the ferns stilled where 3 wild bodies had passed. The laugh turned into a breath, and the breath turned into gratitude. Miracle had brought no gift that could be held. She had brought proof that love, when it loosened its grip, could become a path back to the forest. And, sometimes, if the evening was kind, the forest sent a small family walking across that path just long enough to be seen. After the evening of the 2 young bobcats, Clara told Matthew first. Not by phone. The sight felt too delicate for wires and distracted voices. She waited until he came up the following Saturday with Elise and Samuel, carrying a bag of groceries, a toolbox he had borrowed and not yet learned to trust, and a bouquet of grocery store tulips that had bent sideways in the car. Samuel ran ahead to the porch, stopped at the lower rail, and whispered as if entering a church. "Is this where Miracle stood?" Clara nodded. He touched the air near the wood, not the wood itself, because Clara had taught him that some places were handled best by not handling them. At 7, he had become serious about rules when they involved animals. He still left crumbs on the sofa and socks in unreasonable places, but he could stand as still as a fence post if someone said a wild creature had passed nearby. Inside, Clara told them over tea. She described Miracle at the ferns, the pale-nosed kitten, the darker one tipping into a sapling, and Mr. Pickwick choosing strategic blindness. Samuel's eyes grew so wide that Elise had to remind him to breathe. "Did they have names?" he asked. "No," Clara said gently. "They had a mother." Samuel thought that over, then nodded, accepting the correction as if it were a gift. By autumn, the story had spread only as far as it needed to. Nora knew, of course, because Nora could learn a secret from the way a pie cooled on a windowsill. Eli Kanoeve kept because Clara reported signs the way he had taught her to. Tracks near the creek, scat on the ridge trail, a scrape on the birch. Tessa at the library knew only that Clara's smile sometimes drifted toward the windows when children chose books about forests. No one went looking. That became the rule of Hollow Ridge without anyone writing it down. If Miracle appeared, people watched from inside or from far away. If tracks crossed a yard, they were admired and left until weather erased them. If hens grew nervous near dusk, they were tucked safely in earlier without complaint. Nora stopped calling the Porch Visits Company, after Clara gave her a look over the rim of the green mug. "Fine," Nora said. "Not company. Distinguished weather." The phrase stayed. That winter, whenever the lantern glowed and snow moved through the light, Samuel would ask whether distinguished weather might come. Miracle did not always appear on Christmas Eve after that. Some years she came near enough to leave prints by the lilac bush. One year Clara saw only her pale muzzle at the far edge of the woodpile before the bobcat turned away, broad and silent, followed by one young shape nearly her size. Another year, sleet glazed the ridge road, and no tracks came at all. Clara still lit the lantern. The tradition settled into the house like wood smoke. Christmas Eve grew less like waiting and more like making room. Clara cooked potato soup because it held warmth without fuss. Nora brought shortbread animals with questionable anatomy. Matthew repaired whatever small thing Clara had avoided mentioning, though the pantry hinge squeaked again within the week, just to humble him. Elise tied Cedar to the stair rail, and Samuel placed his toy fox beside the window, facing outward like a lookout. They kept the kitchen light low after supper. They spoke softly, not because they expected Miracle to understand manners, but because hush suited the ridge. Outside, snow whispered against the porch boards. Inside, the stove clicked, the green mug steamed beside Clara's hand, and the blue blanket traveled from rocking chair to Samuel's knees to Nora's shoulders, depending on who claimed to be coldest. Mr. Pickwick lived 2 more winters, ancient and opinionated, until the end. During his last Christmas Eve, he settled beneath the window and watched the lantern with half-closed eyes. When a flying squirrel landed on the porch rail and startled everyone by becoming a gray scarf-vey kep-ite hat feet, Mr. Pickwick merely blinked as if he had retired from surprise. Samuel whispered, "He Seth," pretending it was his idea, and Clara laughed so quietly the mug trembled in her hand. After Mr. Pickwick was gone, Nora brought a small orange ornament shaped like a cat and hung it low on Clara's tree. It looked indignant among the cedar sprigs. No one said much. They did not need to. Some absences became gentler when given a place near the light. Miracle aged too, though more privately. Her visits, when they came, were shorter. Her muzzle paled until it caught the lantern glow like frost. The crescent notch in her ear remained clear. She still distrusted the repaired porch step, testing it once with a paw and withdrawing when it creaked, as if the board's character had not improved. One winter night, she rubbed her cheek against the rail, then against the post where Samuel had once tied a red ribbon. The ribbon had been removed months before, but Miracle paused there, tasting old scent, whiskers forward. Clara watched from the window with her family behind her. She no longer felt the old urge to open the door. That desire had softened into something wider. She understood by then that the closed door was part of the welcome. The glass kept the boundary honest. The porch light said this place remembered. The dark trees said the rest of her life belonged elsewhere. And that was beautiful, even when it ached. One Christmas Eve, Samuel, older now and trying not to sound like a child, asked, "Do you think she knows we love her?" Clara looked at Miracle S-tracks, crossing the snow below the rail, each print clean and silent, moving toward the brook. "Mott thinks she knows this place never chased her," Clara said. "For a wild thing, that may be close enough." Samuel leaned against her shoulder without answering. Outside, wind combed powder from the spruce boughs. The porch lantern held its amber circle. Somewhere beyond Miracle Brook, a bobcat moved through her own country, carrying the smell of cedar, old wool, orange cat, child laughter, and winter wood, in whatever private way wild creatures carried memory. In Clara's 78th winter, the first snow came before Thanksgiving and stayed. It softened Hollow Ridge into the old shapes she remembered best. The shed roof bowed white, the stone wall wearing a careful line of frost, Miracle Brook speaking under ice in a voice that sounded smaller but not weaker. Clara moved more slowly by then. Her hands had become knuckled and tender in cold weather, and Matthew had installed a rail beside the porch steps, after pretending it was only because he liked projects. She let him pretend. Samuel was 18 that year, tall and quiet, with the same careful way of listening Clara had once seen in David. He came early for Christmas Eve and carried in firewood without being asked. Elise made tea. Matthew checked the lantern bulb twice, though Clara had already checked it that morning. "It's ready," she told him. "Motkano vekep," he said, then checked it once more. Nora was gone by then, and Mr. Pickwick had been only an orange ornament on the tree for many seasons. Still, Clara felt them both in the room. Nora in the crooked shortbread recipe Elise tried to follow. Mr. Pickwick in the small tuft of orange yarn Samuel had tied to the lowest cedar branch as a joke no one needed explained. By dusk, snow began falling straight down, slow and generous. Clara sat in the rocking chair with the blue blanket over her knees and the green mug-warming Beote hot hands. The porch lantern glowed outside, amber against blue evening. No one spoke much. That had become part of the tradition, too. For several years, Miracle had come only in signs: a track by the lilac, a cheek mark on the rail. Once, a pale hair caught on the splintered post where the red ribbon had once been tied. Eli, retired now but still ranger-hearted, had told Clara that an old bobcat might shift deeper into protected woods, might travel less, might leave the familiar edges to younger animals. Clara had nodded. She had not asked whether Miracle was still alive. Some questions felt like doors that did not need opening unless the night itself opened them. At 8, the wind lifted slightly. The wreath brushed the door with its dry cedar whisper. Samuel, standing near the window, straightened. "Grandma," he breathed. Clara turned her head. At the edge of the lantern light stood a bobcat. For one moment, age and snow made the animal seem almost made of the weather itself. Then Clara saw the crescent notch in the left ear, the pale muzzle, the bent whiskers still pointing forward, as if asking one last private question of the world. Miracle. She was thinner than before, but not broken. Her shoulders remained proud. Her paws placed themselves with the same careful silence Clara had loved for half a lifetime. Snow gathered along her back, and she shook it from her nose with the old irritated snap. A laugh escaped Clara before she could stop it. Miracle looked toward the window. No one moved. Matthew's arm went around Elise. Samuel lowered himself slowly to the floor, as if becoming smaller might make the room kinder. Clara stayed in the rocking chair because her knees would not have trusted her to rise quickly, and because, after all these years, she knew Miracle did not need her standing. The bobcat stepped onto the porch. The repaired board creaked. Miracle paused, lifted her paw, and stared down with such ancient disappointment that Clara's laugh turned soft and wet at the edges. Even now. Even after winters and kittens and storms and years of becoming legend in one family's careful silence, Miracle did not forgive that step. She moved around it. At the rail, she lowered her head and rubbed her cheek against the weathered wood. Once, twice, slowly, her eyes half closed, not in tameness, but in recognition. The motion carried everything words would have ruined. The creek bank, the blue blanket, the rehab shed, the first Christmas return, the two young shadows in spring ferns, the years when only the lantern spoke. Then Miracle sat beneath the light. Clara's house held its breath around her. The bobcat's ears turned toward the brook, her nose lifted, scenting cedar, wool, old smoke, human age, young man, winter soup, and the faint orange yarn on the tree inside. Clara wondered vekep hatate any of it meant to her. Perhaps nothing human. Perhaps only layers of scent in a life made of weather and hunger and memory. But Miracle had crossed snow to be there. That was enough. Clara placed her palm against her own chest, over the slow beat beneath her sweater. She did not wave. She did not whisper. She only held still, letting her whole life answer quietly from the other side of the glass. Miracle looked at her for a long time. Then the old bobcat leaned forward and touched her nose to the lower rail, leaving one small dark oval in the frost, just as she had done years before. After that, she rose, stepped down from the porch without using the creaking board, and walked toward the spruce line. At the edge of the yard, she stopped once. Behind her, the porch lantern glowed. Before her, the forest waited. Miracle turned her head, not fully, only enough for the notched ear to show black against the snow. Then she vanished. No one hurried to speak. Clara closed her eyes. She felt the blue blanket over her knees, thin now but warm. She smelled cedar and wood smoke. She heard Samuel take one careful breath, then another. The old ache inside her did not disappear. It loosened. Matthew knelt beside her chair and took her hand. "She came back," he said. Clara opened her eyes to the empty porch, the rail marked by one fading touch, the lantern making gold of falling snow. "Yes," she said, and she left right. For Clara, that became the gentlest truth of all. Miracle had never belonged to the house, the porch, the blanket, or the woman who had first waited beside the frozen brook. She had belonged to the dark trees, the hidden ledges, the cold, clean paths no human could follow. Yet, year after year, she had returned to the edge of warmth and remembered without surrendering herself. That was the little miracle. Not that a wild creature stayed. That she chose to come back and was loved enough to leave again. And so the camera of memory pulled back from Hollow Ridge, slowly, the way evening pulled blue over snow. The porch lantern kept burning after Miracle disappeared into the spruce shadows. Inside, Clara rested beneath the blue blanket while her family sat near her without crowding the quiet. The green mug cooled on the sill. The orange ornament hung low on the cedar tree, looking as indignant as ever. Outside, the mark of Miracle's nose faded from the rail, not because it had meant little, but because all tender signs belonged partly to weather. By morning, fresh snow would soften the tracks. The brook would keep speaking under ice. Somewhere beyond the ridge, an old bobcat would move through her own country, carrying whatever memory wild hearts were able to keep. Clara would not need proof after that night. Neither would Matthew, Elise, or Samuel. They would remember the way Miracle avoided the creaking step, the way she sat under the lantern, the way leaving could feel less like loss when love had finally learned not to close its hand. For anyone still listening, let the house grow quiet now. Let the snow gather on the porch rail. Let the forest keep its secrets without feeling far away. Thank you for staying Vekep ite hot Clara and Miracle through all the winters between them. May the thought of that little Christmas Eve visitor rest softly in your heart tonight. May every creature you have loved, held, helped, or released find its own safe path through the dark. And may you sleep gently, while one amber lantern shines on falling snow and a notched-eared bobcat fades peacefully into the trees. End of story. Sleep gently, friends.